Welcome to the Financial Fox. Today we are exploring the hot topic of the Internet of Blockchain and digital assets with two experts who have all contributed in a big way to innovative projects with disruptive technologies. Let me introduce them. First, we have Josiah Spackman, known as the Chief Fund Officer of DigiByte. But Josiah has been central to DigiByte project development and also awareness among the DigiByte community. And then we have Emal Safi, CEO of Aircoins, which is the biggest augmented reality crypto platform in the world. How are you guys?
Great, thanks for having us on here.
And finally, joining us later is JP Beaudet, the brains behind the Canadian blockchain developer Zeu Crypto Networks.
What I would like to start is with this concept of Internet blockchain and particularly, the power that blockchain technology has to basically shape the next generation of the Internet.
It's very easy in this day and age to say that this, like what my product is or what this project is going to be 2.0 of something, Web 2.0, Ethereum 2.0, all of those it gets tossed around really quite easily. But at the same time, I'm still personally incredibly optimistic about the possibilities for blockchain, where it's going to take things, the revolution that this could potentially bring. It is the collection, let's be honest, of probably a good two dozen different technologies that already existed. But the way that it has brought them together is very new, very unique. And I do think that this has the possibility to change the internet and to change, especially humanity, the way that we are going forward in a lot of different ways.
I mean, the internet was meant to be a decentralized platform where everybody could connect, and this was, I think, really in the inception of the internet. But obviously, 50 years ago, blockchain was not a technology that was developed. So it started in the way that it could start with centralized power. So maybe blockchain. Do you think it could actually be the underpinning real technology that was meant to be at the inception of the internet?
I guess this kind of comes down to, are we talking about Bitcoin as Bitcoin as blockchain, Bitcoin as decentralized and distributed ledger technology? I personally think that we can take a lot of like the best pieces of it. We don't just have to use it as money. And there are a lot better things, obviously, for example, assets. And Aircoins is a fantastic example of this, what they're doing with it. There are so many more things you can do with a blockchain than just me paying you. I mean, it's fantastic that obviously I can pay you and nobody can stop me from paying you through the internet, peer-to-peer. But is that really the best use that we could come up with for this technology? Sure, maybe it's one of the uses, but is it the best? I would argue probably not.
Well, hey, we live in a data-driven society now. Data moves a lot of the economies, a lot of the companies now. And as a society, when we go online, we share our personal content, or we create content and we share this with the rest of the people, but we don't really get rewarded back for our work. And other artists, other music artists, sometimes they release stuff and they don't get rewarded for it. It's their content. So these social platforms, your Facebooks and stuff, they take our content and they kind of monetize from it, right? But we don't really get paid for that. So when we talk about ownership and digital assets on the internet, that ownership piece of it is kind of important for us. So us creating these wallets and crypto wallets on our devices and holding the private keys ourselves, this is kind of a new twist to how the economies are going to work. So how we share, there's personal information. There's when we talk about the internet, there's ISPs, internet service provider. There's gateways. So these gateway and service providers kind of manage the traffic of information and data, right? So when we talk about decentralized networks, maybe this is what we're talking about, is that where nobody owns the gateways, nobody owns the routes, right? So, and that's why Ethereum is kind of found to work really well, because it uses its own gas to to propel itself, right? You need to pay for the network to use it. So there's a few different kind of ways of looking at it. How decentralized internets and how decentralized assets and information will go forward. It'll be a little bit different, but I think we're going to get rewarded for the content we generate and the content we produce. And companies using our data, they're going to have to, kind of pay us back for that. So with Aircoins, like as I said, there's lots of ways of working with crypto assets and digital assets. We've done, we're doing rewards points, redeemables, collectibles in augmented reality. This gets people, there's a few different angles to this. We're getting people introduced to crypto, but we're also getting them to go out. And for the existing crypto people, it's something new to do. So we're just kind of making a product that everyone's going to like and everyone can contribute, and it's going to be for them.
Can you maybe explain a little bit more about these aspects about rewards? Because obviously with blockchain and decentralized technology, the community becomes a key and very important for any project. I mean, Josiah, he definitely knows that with DigiByte. So how do you work that mechanism out within Aircoins?
Well, yeah, in terms of rewards, here's the thing, right? When companies deploy rewards programs, it's a huge undertaking. There's a lot of management involved. There's a lot of databases and connections. So there's a lot to do, right? So what we do is, just like crypto, instead of having, let's say, your air miles, you're collecting air miles and you want to go redeem it, you have to contact Air Miles or set up an account. Whereas in Aircoins, because it's a crypto asset, you can spend it right away or you can redeem it right away. Aircoins is developing out. We are bringing in functionality. There's many different pieces that fit together along with the augmented reality, retail, and also growing the user base too. So there's a lot going on, but bringing in rewards in augmented reality, it just benefits the whole kind of ecosystem. It's easier to deploy. Consumers get a better experience viewing the rewards in augmented reality. And plus, because we're location-based, people get to travel, and that way you're driving foot traffic too. So there's a few things we're doing that kind of adds into the rewards kind of ecosystem.
So you were basically saying that augmented reality is a plus value, is kind of something that is actually boosting the experience of the users.
Yes. Augmented reality brings a new memorable experience that people enjoy, and it's a visual experience too. So it's just not a text message. It's not a notification. It's not a bing. You're actually viewing objects in AR, and when people see the coins and other objects floating in AR, they kind of enjoy that, and they take pictures of it and stuff and send it to us.
Wow, that's exciting. Josiah, do you want maybe to share some of your experience with working with the DigiByte community?
Yeah, well, it's certainly been interesting to step into this kind of a role out of basically nowhere. But I just before I go on, I want to say I quite appreciated the analogy there about a decentralized internet and obviously blockchain being permissionless when it comes to, like, maybe we've got our existing ISPs and things like that. I thought that was actually quite a pointed example there. In terms of engaging with the community and things like that, it's definitely been challenging but rewarding. So in terms of what I'm doing at the moment, obviously none of it is specifically like a paid role, for example, but one of the advantages I guess that I've got is to be able to talk about this kind of thing and not feel that I suppose I'm being swayed by the finances is kind of nice. But in terms of bringing this back to assets, one of the things that I've actually been looking at with the community is sort of like you mentioned, an incentive and a way to reward people, like for participation, for you to get paid for the content that you are creating. Obviously, I don't want to be paid for the content that I am making, but if I can reward other people for participating in that content, like if they leave a comment, for example, I could leave a digi asset for them to reward them for that, for their good behavior, for helping somebody else in the community in terms of, like, let's say, for example, in our support chat, maybe I see somebody and they're helping out, and so I'm able to reward them with this. Now, maybe it's worth something. Maybe it's not worth something. Maybe it's simply just a little badge that they get like in their cell phone that they can kind of hold up to their friends and go, look, I helped 10 people this month and I've been rewarded for it. It's certainly an interesting concept, the whole notion of being paid for the content that you create, both directly or indirectly. How will it be on a broader scale going forward? I'm really not entirely too sure, but seeing things like, for example, Medium or Steemit and a bunch of other things where you can get paid for making an article. Most of the time, unfortunately, what I've seen of it, people get paid like cents in the dollar. And that sucks, obviously, when it takes you a long time to write something and produce something that's good, that people get involved with, that they appreciate, that they enjoy. But going forward, were that sort of thing to take off, I don't know. I think potentially we could see like people being reimbursed with tipping services and things significantly. Does that specifically need to be on a blockchain, though? I'm not entirely too sure. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, so, we use, different platforms, currencies for convenience sake, right? If it's easier for me to send, funds or assets or whatever to Josiah, then, we both use DigiByte. So I'll be like, hey, do you take DigiByte? He'll be like, yeah, like, okay, here you go, right? And it's fast, it's convenient. Maybe PayPal wouldn't be easier. Maybe he doesn't take PayPal. Maybe he's in New Zealand. They don't have Western Union or whatever the example may be.
And it takes a long time.
So for me to send, DigiByte, I'll take a few seconds. So it's for convenience, right? And as more people can start getting to use it and start getting the hang of the wallets and the convenience, and their friends start using it, then it's going to be easier and they're going to use it more. So I think it's just one additional tool for us to communicate and work together as business or as society. So if it's easier to do PayPal, we'll do PayPal. If it's easier to do Bitcoin, we do Bitcoin. If it's easier and cheaper to do DigiByte, then we'll do DigiByte, right? And like you guys said, we're still early on in the grand scheme of things. There's lots of avenues we can pursue. And gaming seems to be, a great place to start for crypto assets. The gamers they're very inclined about how the economies work, and supply and demand, and what's rare and what's, so it's a combination of items, and it's the overall experience too, along with everything else, the branding, the experience, the community. So there's a lot of factors as to, why somebody would choose to use a specific asset. Yeah.
And I think as well, like going forward, so like especially when it comes to gaming, like a quick bit of history in case you're not familiar with it. Back in the day, DigiByte was doing DigiByte gaming, and people would get rewarded for playing League of Legends. You'd get a rampage kill, you kill 5 people, whatever, in 30 seconds, and you are rewarded with DigiByte. It was actually a really great way to get people interested, involved, and as a result of that, we had an insane number of people downloading the DigiByte Core wallet, probably more than we would have otherwise ever imagined. But it was really great to see. Now, the interesting thing, though, is if we take on the one hand, say, for example, using it as rewards versus if we look at things like Reddit is a great example with their Reddit Gold and Reddit Silver. At no point during my time on Reddit, where I've been using Reddit, have I ever sort of stopped to think, you know what, this would be really great. I need this as a blockchain. I need an immutable ledger, and I need it to be publicly accessible and publicly verifiable that I've gone and sent this to Bob, and he's been paid for that comment. I'm not entirely convinced that kind of like micro tipping specifically is an ideal scenario. But at the same time, like you mentioned, like gaming and people specifically using games as an in-game currency, like with, for example, Aircoins, I also think that if you were to do it with, say, for example, World of Warcraft and use it as an in-game currency, now all of a sudden when people go to withdraw that money, if they have it on a blockchain, they don't specifically just have to keep it in the game and have their in-game ecosystem, but now you have a real world ecosystem that can be completely built around that. You will be rewarded by paying, by playing that particular game with like the equivalent of cash, a token, but
I do agree with you, Josiah. I think, regarding the gaming specifically, I think one of the problems was basically to actually take this money, these rewards out of the game and cash them in. Lots of people has got, they have got lots of assets, and let's call it like that. They are stuck into a game. They can use it only for that game, for example. They can't use on other games. So maybe this being able to transfer the money from, or the rewards from one game to another game would be great, but also have easy access to actually cash. So gaming, it opens up much bigger opportunity.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, like, let's say, for example, if we were to take Fortnite is huge. And one of the really cool things as well is they're also doing like tournaments and the likes. The same as the Dota 2 international tournament recently was worth like 35 million US dollars. Like, that's a ton of money. But especially, like, it would be interesting to see what would happen if that money was an in-game currency as well as being a blockchain at the same time. And if I were able to use my, what do they use in Fortnite? Is it V-Bucks or something? If I were able to use that money to go towards the prize pool for somebody to win, and I've generated this by playing the game, by coming first at the end of it and beating everybody else, and at the same time I'm able to withdraw that directly and then perhaps redeem it in other manners. Like, there are so many incredible possibilities that we could do with this. And I'm really excited for the first big tech company that kind of takes that leap and says, you know what, we're going to do a digital asset with a video game as our in-game currency. Like, I think there is a huge opportunity there. And seeing this obviously with Aircoins is a fantastic idea. Like, this is great. This is groundbreaking, and this is exciting.
Yeah, so we maybe talk a little bit more about digi assets, because you mentioned digital assets, and then we can talk a little bit more also about digi assets, because I think this is now a really important aspect of the new economy. So the physical assets is there, but in this world, there is a growing interest into digital assets, which actually reflect the physical assets, but then they can be traded and all in a different way.
Yeah, well, so that's an interesting one, because two things come to mind. The first of all was one of the gentlemen from the DigiByte community, Zero Reward on Twitter. He's actually gone and created some specific limited edition coins, DigiByte coins. Now, as a result of this, when he sent them on, he's also sent on a digital representation of it. Now, directly between the two, there is no immediate link to say that the one that I have is the one that is being shipped to me, for example. And what I could do in the future would be to ship that one coin off to somebody while retaining the digi asset myself. However, comparatively, there are also the likes of, for example, Matthew. He's, again, one of the community members, and he runs a small mining firm. And what he did before the AutoCrypt algorithm upgrade went live on DigiByte, he decided he was going to go and purchase several large mining rigs and operate a small-scale mining farm. Obviously, that can be a bit expensive to go and build like really, really big. So what he did was he decided to crowdsource it and say to people, right, what I want to do is this is what I'm going to do. If you want to buy shares in it, there are going to be, I think he said like maybe 120 shares, for example. And what will happen is if you buy those shares and you have that digi asset in your wallet, I will pay out to you every single day, week, or month based on the rewards and the profit that this has made. So using digi assets in that kind of a fashion and a manner is really quite exciting, because now whoever holds that specific token can go to anybody else. Let's say, for example, I held 5 of them and I'm really hard up for cash this month because I need to go fix my car and I've got to sell some of these assets in a hurry. So what I do is I come along here to Steffi and I say, hey, look, I've got these digi assets, and if I sell them to you for whatever price that we decide, we can barter and trade directly. If I sell you these 5, what's going to happen at the end of today is you're going to start getting those rewards paid directly to your wallet, the wallet address that holds these digi assets. So I can sell them to you. There's no middleman required. I get, for example, some DigiByte that I can use to go fix my car. And now you have a recurring income from this particular mining farm using these digi assets. So there's a whole lot of really exciting applications for this.
But you really need a digital asset exchange that is reliable.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of like this digi asset wouldn't work if it was on sort of other blockchains, for example, and it needs to be one that you can then subsequently get paid out in as well. But in terms of this being a digi asset is a prime example, because it's something where you are investing in a mining farm, you're getting daily rewards. Another one is a insurance company that is issuing their digi assets on the DigiByte blockchain. They too are going to pay dividends to the holders of those tokens.
So do you think that the current financial markets, it will be, it could be probably a sector where the digi assets could take over, for example, the shares, token shares, that they will become digital assets, and then it would be all integrated a much different way.
Yeah, so the interesting part is we're going to have a kind of like a marriage between the old and the new. So for something like this, for Matthew with his mining farm, I actually know there's another gentleman who's doing the same sort of thing with a solar farm. For that kind of like a solar farm or a mining operation, it's great because you can simply say, here you go, I'm going to start paying you on the regular. For example, if you were to do this with a business, the business must have an independent share registry. And so this needs to be kept up to date by, well, in New Zealand at least, by a company's office, for example. And it's this independent company's office which is defined as the true and accurate record. So that's obviously kind of difficult. What we need for the old and the new to kind of come together and to say, right, my shares, although I have these 100 million shares here for my company, like say, for example, for Apple, I have 100 million Apple shares. Although we have this company's register over here that says that 50% are over here with Tim Cook, for example, and the other 50% are out with a whole bunch of other people and investors. Whoever owns those digital assets, that is the true and accurate record. So we have to kind of shift I suppose, and as a society, like you mentioned, come along and grow, I suppose, to the place where we can have a blockchain as the true and accurate record.
Picking up on that point, let's go back to the share register, which is quite interesting. So at the moment, let's say in the UK, we have a share register that is taking on the count of the ownership of the shares, the number of the shares. In case we go to the digital assets or the digital assets are going to be implemented into that system, we are going to end up with a share register that is going to be kind of automated, it's going to be public. So I could basically, there will be complete transparency who owns what shares, how many shares. There is no need for an investor can check that clearly just logging it in. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and they can check and they could see that there is actually, instead of just 100 million shares, what they've done is they've gone and reissued some additional shares. Maybe there's now 120 million shares. Maybe there's 1 billion shares instead, for example. But you can see who owns them. And let's say, for example, there was a corporate sellout and you're being bought out by another company. You can say, for example, you can easily prove, right, I own this address. I've got 500 million of these 1 billion shares. And so I own 50% of your company. You can do some interesting things like that, but it obviously requires that society as a whole accepts the notion that the true and accurate share record is the blockchain rather than this third-party company that's over here.
Yeah, and I think another point probably is obviously about regulation, which is always challenging within the crypto and blockchain space. Emal, we maybe want to tell us your views. I mean, you are in the game, which is, you know, it could be even worse for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about digital assets and storing value to these assets, or recording, recording ownership on these digital assets, there's different variations of it. Like Ethereum, right? More of a smart contract based chain, and using its own gas to transact. And you have Bitcoin, which acts more like a monetary kind of system, and DigiByte kind of too. And then you have and then in the stock world, you have your STOs coming out. So yes, exchanges and companies are already moving towards their recording their assets on the blockchain. So it's already happening. And Stefan, you make a good point about how do we kind of manage these. How do we control these? And yes, and countries need to contain these digital assets too, because they want to be able to charge tax on it or make sure there's proper regulations on it. Well, that's the tricky thing, right? Because you can store, you can have a token that's decentralized like Ethereum, but I can have an STO of, let's say, an Apple stock or whatever stock of a new company stock. Then if I have that in a certain platform, then that may not be allowed, or maybe I can't walk over with the border, because that's the powerful thing about digital assets, is that you can store it and you can save it on a hard drive or store it on a ledger, right? But this brings, the great things about it is that it brings efficiencies into the economies, because if you had an Apple stock or a Microsoft stock and you wanted to liquidate that, you got to go talk to your broker. You got to go talk to your banker. It's going to take 2 or 3 days to process. But if you had your, Apple stock or Microsoft stock sitting on your ledger, you can liquidate right away. You can plug it into your computer and send it over to whoever you want to liquidate to. But I think the challenge becomes is cross-border transactions. It's how do we contain people crossing over the border with these stuff. Before the best store of value was the $100 bill. The $100 US bill was the best store of value. So when you can carry around $10,000 pretty easily in your pocket. But now for the first time ever, you can store hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions on just a ledger and put it in your pocket, right? Yes, there's some trade-offs in terms of how we operate as a society and what are the efficiencies, and just the efficiencies for everybody, efficiencies and savings, right? We don't want to pay these high interest. We don't want to pay these high tax fees. It's just, as an economy, society, it's just breaking us down, right? So
taxes is an interesting one as well. And so like you mentioned, like in terms of putting your hands into someone's pockets, you can't do that with a blockchain. Like the government can't come along and put their hands in your pocket and go, well, we're going to go and we're going to take your wages now, guys. You can't do anything about it. And you're stuck, right? Like they can't do that because they're your private keys. They can't come along and rewrite. I mean, if it were a centralized ledger, then sure, they can do that. But if you have something like you were talking about, say, for example, with Bitcoin, with DigiByte, like they're sweet out of luck. Like, what are they going to do? They can knock on your door and say, please, pretty please, can you pay us? Like, but what can they actually do? So that's where obviously the regulation does come into play, and it's kind of an interesting question of what happens if you don't want to pay that. I know, for example, that I paid my taxes both this year and last year on all of my crypto investments and things. And in fact, last year, they even gave me a refund because of the fact the price went down so much. So thank you to the New Zealand Inland Revenue Department. But it raises up some interesting things. And again, we kind of come back to that marriage of the old versus the new, because on the one hand, yeah, they can't take the taxes. They can ask you for them. But again, at the same time, there are all of these efficiencies, like you mentioned, of being able to trade so quickly and efficiently. And it's exciting.
It's just been, we've been talking about how blockchain is basically changing, let's say, the internet, the new internet, and also we have been talking about digital assets. It would even maybe it would be great if you could also give your insight on Internet of Blockchains. I mean, this is a term that you use a few times. You mentioned about decentralized web and Web 3.0. Josiah gave his view, Emal as well. What is your comment, your takeaway?
Well, the Internet of Blockchain is quite a new term. I love to say Internet of Ledger because it's more about the ledger than the blockchain itself. But let's say that to wrap up the expression, this would mean, in my context, the way to connect all the ledger that currently exists, either private or public, and legacy system. So as we all know, cryptocurrency and digital asset is completely changing the landscape, exactly as they said before. It is a new digitalized economy. And it is coming over and it is not going away, but it is not yet adopted everywhere. And there's still need a big industry solution for now to connect the old world with the new world. And in either way, blockchain technology is also a little limited. As super, as decentralized, and as not blockable as it is, which is a very, very important feature in this world where there's the war of dollars. But it is limited in scalability. So everyone's speaking about transaction per second, and every blockchain is doing great work. DigiByte is an excellent example, but still, I don't think that any one blockchain will fix it all. And maybe many will agree with that, but it needs to be stacked together. We need to create connectors that make it possible for all good protocol to be connected together. For us, Internet of Blockchain is the way to achieve that.
JP, just picking up on that, I would like you to talk a little bit about your Zeu patent for the decentralized transactional communication protocol that you announced for Zeu. So then you can explain that a bit to Josiah and Emal, and then we can see what's their views on that.
Yes, absolutely. So we are doing a new research on this. We are working for now on the proof of concept to come up with our data to the community to see how this fits. We are now proposing a new protocol to be able to communicate between blockchain. The protocol is blockless. The protocol is not based on smart contract. It is fundamentally conceptualized as a form of layer over TCP/IP, in which people will transactionally communicate shared instruction in a way where nobody can cheat nobody. The consensus is based on a chain of users that is using the same transaction, creating a situation in which one transaction will settle for up to infinite number of users, let's say 3 to 1 million. And so it is working a very, very old and grassroots way in which people will settle transaction together, and every user will mine the transaction of the next user. So this way you completely avoid the need to have a node. You can still have one if you want to make it more performant, but technically everyone could mine the transaction of everyone. It creates something very, very similar to Lightning networks, in which people can commit digital asset or data before transaction and then exchange it at a very, very high speed between any number of participants, and then they will settle on agreed condition. Could be time cycle, could be some trigger point in a code, could be the equivalent of a multi-sig scheme, a bit like what they do in smart contract. So technically what we did is use the structure of a smart contract without the need of a virtual machine run by a validator node.
Do you run into any kind of problems in terms of, say, for example, for the Lightning Network to scale and to do that kind of, the ability for my transaction to hop to you via Emal and then via Steffi to get to you, where you've got to know the state of the whole entire network, or at least a decent amount of it? How do you get around that kind of knowledge requirement in terms of like the bandwidth that's going to require going forwards, especially as the network grows? Or otherwise, you potentially run into the IOTA problem, I suppose.
Well, technically, what we try to achieve there is to avoid the necessity to share a ledger between all users. So already there, you're not forced to compare a ledger. So the time issue is the issue we're running on here. And so technically, we're supposed to use a delay that is imperfect. So our margin of error is based on the fact that we don't have a block as an objective time value. This is the real big difference that we have. So then we need to trust the first one of the chain, which become the objective time for everyone in the chain. And so apart from that, people are just exchanging data that they need to exchange together. I'm not exchanging you all my ledger, everything. I'm sharing you a commitment. And if we are able to prove that both our commitment are exactly the same, then we execute. It's a two-phase. You commit, you verify, it works, it doesn't work. There are two states, success or fail.
I like what you guys are doing there, JP, because instead of creating your own networks, your nodes and stuff, which has to be supported, you guys are using existing infrastructure, which is amazing, right? You guys are using,
yeah, exactly. It's using your VM, as a matter of fact, in your computer or your device.
Exactly, and then you guys are using TCP over IP protocols too. So this accelerate. This allows for faster speeds, faster transactions too.
Yes and no. It's interesting because technically the real thing about our DTCP is the transaction itself is not that fast. Technically, the transaction must be done within a second or it fails. But you can do 1 million transactions at the same time. So technically, it's the scalability of the number of the transaction or action you can parallelize and multi-thread at the same time that will give you your speed of the network. Not really this transaction per se, because the transaction is still within 2%. So you have 1 second for the transaction to fail. And this can get a little bigger because the equation is made in so that if you have more than 100 users, the time of 1 second delay is a little higher. So it could go up to a few seconds per transaction. Let's say we are 5,000 people in the transaction. But if you think about it, if you have 5 transactions that is settled at once in 1 second between these people, technically you did 5,000 transactions a second. And if you multiply that by the number of transactions that is occurring within the network, it will give high speed. It's just not the high speed of a network as we normally calculate it for just how much a validator is able to create blocks quickly. It's just another way of thinking speed.
Absolutely. It's like, in our current networks, you have routers that have routing tables, and these routing tables have already, as a list of, the host and the sender and the receiver, right? So that's kind of like almost like a blockchain too, where you have these routes already cached onto these routers. And it's kind of like, some of these protocols, crypto coins, where they call it the lightweight blockchain. So they don't cache the entire blockchain, they cache only a segment of it. So imagine having routers in the future, caching a piece of the blockchain, existing routers, existing protocols, existing networks. The thing with blockchains is that the current blockchains is that, especially running like networks, is that that it travels over the OSI model and then it has to hit a node, right? So it goes back to the physical model. So there's a delay. There's a delay between that. So imagine just caching all your blockchains on the internet through your ISP or through routers or through cached routes, right? So there's different ways of doing it. And then with the introduction of IP version 6, which every address is unique and all networks are moving to IPv6 anyways, right? So your MAC address is unique. What if your wallet, your future crypto wallet was your MAC address, right? And this is unique. This is cached on the network. You're using existing infrastructure. So the future of blockchain protocols and how it's cached on the internet and how it goes over the Tor network and back and forth, I think there's still a lot of more innovations to go, right?
Oh yeah. This is a bit why we wanted to do it as generic as it is now, because exactly of this, we want to make it buildable. And so it's really like an experience into, is it a new blockless way to fix some problem that we have in the industry without creating a new blockchain protocol? We don't, there's enough good protocol adopted with large community, and we don't want to create a new one. So what can we fix now? We can fix the internet of blockchain, and that can still be fixed.
JP, we mentioned about scalability. Are there any challenges within security?
Pardon me? With security?
We mentioned about the challenging of scalability. What I wanted to know is that Is there any challenges within the security and the protocol?
Absolutely. Decentralization is a challenge in security. We always talk about decentralization being a way of getting out the third party, which is one of its greatest feature, but it's also removing trust. So removing trust has a security aspect to it. So if our own protocol, the TCP, is to work, it needs to be secure. So the way security is tackled into that, it is using pretty much grassroots multi-signature and cryptographic signature to ensure unicity of things without the necessity to validate it with a whole blockchain. So technically, you're kind of using something that is already unique to be able to prove this. But we go a little deeper into this, in which we force people to share a unique generic secret that is created each time to ensure that the communication has not been tampered with at any rate. So this and cryptographic signature is completely disabling the ability to fake data. But even if you do find a way to fake it, then there's a verify phase in which any asset or data needs to be committed in advance. If you're not able to prove that you made the transaction on a blockchain, even before it has been validated by the first node, then it will automatically fail, and before there's any verification on the blockchain whatsoever. So how can I simplify this? It's a way to say we exchange ticket proving that we did an action, and then we verify if the action has been done on a network, and if yes, we continue. So we found a way to make it almost uncheatable.
Josiah, what's your thought? Do you see a possible use case or maybe implementation of the DCP Zeu protocol with DigiByte blockchain on some specific project?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting having obviously previously tested a bunch of different things in terms of things like the latency around the internet, impacting on block verification, CPU, everything from requiring a multi-threaded wallet for the way that you verify all of your transactions, because you can't just single thread through several thousand transactions at once. The improvements that we did obviously with our DigiSpeed upgrade to the protocol and the way that their wallets communicate and a bunch of other things. I mean, it certainly sounds interesting. There's obviously a number of things that kind of come to mind in terms of basically like either trusting other people to have other parts of the blockchain rather than having it all yourself and validating it versus simply running, say, for example, an SPV wallet. But I do like the idea of, I mean, like he kind of said, JP, in terms of there's not just going to be one blockchain to rule them all. And I think what we're going to need to have is a way for all of these to interoperate and intercommunicate and talk with each other. I don't think we're going to have like 2,000 like we do now, but I do think that there's certainly a need for, say, for example, Bitcoin to either, say, for example, stay as a stable-ish reserve currency. And then you might have something like Ethereum, for example, which is a Turing complete blockchain. Whereas if you didn't have all of these ICOs and tokens and things like that being issued on it, which could be run elsewhere, say, for example, with DigiAssets, then you can free that up, and even their current limited processing capability could instead be used for things which specifically need that additional full Turing complete EVM. And then you can use DigiAssets to run things, everything from, say, for example, an in-game virtual currency through to a bunch of other things like we've talked about previously, and you can still run a full node and verify and validate every single transaction completely yourself if you wanted to. Again, though, it's interesting coming back to the fact that we've tested several 100,000 transactions per second, the way that the sheer latency of the internet, for example, for me to get data from here through to England, where you are, I have to go through either, say, for example, Hong Kong, or I have to go via the US. So I go from here to Hawaii to California, then across to the other side of the States, and then over to England, just for this video chat that we're having now to occur. And so the interesting thing is, in terms of if we are doing high volume and high capacity transaction per second, gets impacted simply by the latency of the internet and by the fact that it's easy to fragment things and to spend over here versus spend over here. I mean, I'm sure JP's obviously seen that kind of thing occur.
Well, what do you think it will be? No, JP, you want to say something? Go on.
No, I was agreeing that latency of the internet is basically the limit of what we're doing. So you described it very well.
It's a pain, right? Like, let's be honest, it sucks. I'd love for there to be like minimal latency, and then we won't have like me and Emal trying to like say you go first. No, you go first. But I mean, it's the internet that we've got, so whatever.
Yeah. This is a bit why we did the transaction on a byte packet thing. So our goal in there is to be able to do micropayment and microtransactions. So one of the proof of concept we're trying to work for now is to do streaming, so paid streaming. So it will be a high volume byte packet exchange for fake digital asset, in which we could prove how you can do paid streaming in a completely decentralized way. So that will be a good way to benchmark and demonstrate to people the capability of the system.
What could be the best use case for the protocol?
Technically, it will be micropayment. So micropayment in digital asset is a mini problem in which every time you do a transaction, you need to pay fees. Ideally, if you're brilliant, you will do as less transaction as you can because you're gonna save money. So let's say that you want to exchange cents all day long, millions of time you're exchanging 0.1 cents, 2 cents, 1 cent, or a fraction of digital asset every time. It's going to get very, very costly. So this is a bit why things like the Lightning Network has been created. In a way, you can create a tab between one or more party in which they're going to just exchange pseudo transaction and then be settled at the end of it. So what we did is something quite similar, but that can exchange not only Bitcoin to Bitcoin, but any asset to any asset. But it's very, very similar. So now suddenly it becomes possible with certain limitation now to be able to do microtransaction. For now, the limitation of being able to commit asset is a big friction, so we're trying to find a way around that for now.
How about gaming?
Gaming, well, if you have gaming that needs to be paid, let's say gambling, gambling that you want to bet all the time, they have used state channel to prove with DAO Casino, which was a very cool thing, still limited to Ethereum only. So it will have the same capability than a state channel, but it will not be limited to Ethereum, and it's not working on the state of the machine, but it will be very similar in the way it goes.
You know, in terms of which blockchain to utilize for transacting gaming assets or gaming tokens, each, we have different coins, we have different altcoins on our as partnerships that are using their own chain, that have their own ecosystems already. So yes, this cross-chain compatibility will be important, and then also maybe a chained out, a protocol that that all can use, that can eventually share these assets with. So we're always on the lookout for more improved, better chains. For newer assets, it's great to try out the new chains, but for older assets that are already established, migrating those might be a little bit of a tricky task. So if it has Ethereum capabilities, that's awesome. But I think the industry is still, like JP said, still in the R&D phase. So lots of research, lots of development. And I think working with the communities, getting the feedback of the communities and seeing what they like and seeing what they want to kind of see implemented. So it's a combination of R&D, what works business-wise, legal-wise, and what the community is asking for.
I mean, certainly in terms of like, one of the difficult things though, as you scale, is you open yourselves up to the possibility of spam. So where you have, the problem with microtransactions is that to store a microtransaction or to make a microtransaction, the value that you are transacting has to be kind of, I suppose, on par with the cost of doing it. Now, if it's free, effectively, for doing it, you run into the issue of somebody being able to spam the network. Now, the interesting thing is We've seen a couple of things, for example, with the likes of Ravencoin, where it's very cheap for you to go and issue an asset, but then from there on out, once you've issued the asset, because of the minimal-ish cost of subsequently sending that asset onto a bunch of other people, what you can do is create a, hi, please visit my website, and then send it out to every single address that's ever existed in the blockchain for cents in the dollar, for example. And so your asset would now be in the wallets of, let's say, 1 million people for the cost of $1, simply because of the ability of that blockchain to make those microtransactions. Similarly with DigiAssets, the problem that we are foreseeing is that it will eventually cost for me to send the three of you a DigiAsset. How much will that be? I'm not entirely too sure, but eventually it will probably cost more than the hundredth of a cent that it is at the moment.
Yeah.
Now that's a good thing, obviously, because then we avoid spam, because for a spammer to go out and simply send a truckload of assets to people, that's obviously a bad thing. We don't want people's wallets filling up with, like we have already seen with Ravencoin, with like things offering Viagra pills or deep fake porn videos and a bunch of other things. Like that's bad, especially if little Timmy, who's 3 years old, 5 years old, has a wallet and all of a sudden he's got that kind of thing showing up in there. That's obviously less than ideal. So it's an interesting kind of balance, I suppose, in terms of the cost of sending an asset as well as microtransactions at the same time and their utility in a decentralized manner.
Yeah, in that sense, we did use something very similar to the concept of proof of stake to avoid spamming, because what you say is a very, very valid point. So one of the limitations of our system is the same than Lightning Network. You need to commit some asset. There is a way for someone to guarantee your asset for you, but let's say that you need to commit. So this way, it's spamming is very costly business. So technically, before you can really do Lightning transaction between one or more participants, you need to agree on these instructions, and you need to agree on a cycle, and you need to both commit both. When I say both, it could be any number of participants that needs to commit assets. So technically, you will be cut at verification phase before spamming is really started. And if you don't do the first commit and verification phase, the network is not initiated. And then after that, the transaction goes very fast. So there's a delay to initiate the transaction, the first one. This is the only way we could avoid cheating, spamming, stealing, double spending, and all these things.
It's interesting because there's obviously, no matter which way you look at it, there's going to be compromises. And it's interesting, especially being involved with DigiByte, where do we want to draw the line with those compromises in terms of, for example, should every single transaction that would occur, say for example in World of Warcraft, every time you approach an NPC and they give you cash back for completing a quest, for example, should that occur as an actual transaction on the blockchain, or should you simply trust the creators, Blizzard, enough that when you go and you withdraw it, then that occurs as a transaction on the blockchain? It's really interesting kind of stopping to think about where each of these individual compromise, this kind of sounds negative, but different ways of doing it will impact upon the entire DigiAsset. It's something that we still wrestle with a little bit, and we still have regular, possibly even daily discussions about that sort of thing. So
yeah. At Aircoins, we've identified this earlier on in terms of transaction speeds and prices. So at Aircoins, we're doing a hybrid approach where we're processing a lot of our high-speed transactions on the cloud itself, and then when we're ready to withdraw, the assets, then it'll go on chain. So yeah, it's kind of a centralized, decentralized hybrid approach. But yeah, as the speeds and as the prices move on, as the trust in communities grow, yes, those points would be alleviated, and you can transact all your stuff on chain, right?
And it comes back to the Reddit thing as well, in terms of if I'm going to go and I'm going to send you like a Reddit Silver, for example, I don't care that that's not on chain, but what I do care is that I've sent it to you and I can see, obviously we trust Reddit enough that we're going to deposit a little bit of funds in there in one way or another. And I trust them enough that when Emal goes to withdraw that Reddit gold and spend it elsewhere, for example, say he takes it and he spends it on Facebook to give some likes to people, that's the part where it obviously needs to be a permissionless and a decentralized blockchain. And should one particular entity decide to go rogue, like if Reddit decided to eat your money and not give it to you, well, then it'd be a gigantic shitstorm, obviously, and nobody would use them. But the in terms of what goes on chain for a digital asset versus what is kept in some like you say, kept in the cloud that you use for Aircoins, I think people are going to be okay with a little bit of trust in that kind of an aspect, knowing that they can still use a fully decentralized, permissionless blockchain they can verify themselves.
And you're right.
Going to have a lot of value.
You're absolutely right. In Aircoins, we seem to see both. We see really technical people that are interested in the blockchain transactions, and then the people that just love the gamification aspect, that want to get on because of the community too. They don't care. They just, like you said, it comes back to the trust factor, and they just go on and trust that the company's gonna handle their assets well, or that those assets are gonna help them, or whatever, or store for them. So whatever way you want to kind of look at it, but yeah, it comes down to the trust factor. And yeah, this is kind of brand new. This is the digital storing of assets. This is kind of brand new. I mean, the blockchain guys are familiar because of the crypto exchanges out there, but now it's going beyond the crypto exchanges, and now
definitely. I think it's getting more into everybody attention, and definitely the economy is going to change, and the digital asset that would be looked more closely. I quite like the chat we had about the financial markets. I think that's something that will solve lots of problems on transparency and also the challenges that the internet has and still have, like the speed, the scalability of project and security. Anyway, it was we have to close here, and it was really great to have you on the show. Great for Josiah, always brilliant. Emal, was really a pleasure to hear more. Yeah, obviously, DigiByte. Emal, was really great to hear about your project as well, and I'm sure lots of our viewers will now go and check it out a little more closely, and as well as JP with your new protocol. We are really looking forward to see the next use cases and application, and if you could keep us all updated, on Twitter and social media, would be brilliant.
Absolutely.
So if we wanted to find out more about all three of you, obviously, and I'll kind of plug myself as well, where's the best place for us to go to find out more about you, JP, and about your project?
For now, it will be on Twitter. So I will continue to describe type of use case and take question, because I really want to explain to people. But I'm working on creating our data for now. So we are not like DigiByte. You are a large community. You are very well advanced. You have created a lot of stuff. DTCP is pretty new. So I'll be humble enough to admit that. But we are working on benchmarking the stuff. So I'll be the first to admit if it's not as strong as I believe it is. But I'm very, very keen to show you all community to see, can that fix something? And if yes, DigiByte, is it interested to try it into some trial? So this is the approach we have. It's Internet of Blockchain in Thai, that we are the friend of everyone. So I'm really open, guys.
Okay, so let's do more of this kind of chat to make sure that you are able to tell everybody about what is going on, and make sure that you follow JP on Twitter, because I think that's the best place for a Zeu update.
Yes.
Okay.
And Emal as well, where's the best place for us to follow you too?
Yeah, we're on Twitter too. Twitter, and I'm mostly active on LinkedIn.
Oh.
I think Stephanie, I connected with Stephanie through LinkedIn too. So Twitter and LinkedIn.
Guys, thank you very much, and I will have you back on the show very soon. Okay, let's try to do that a bit more regularly.
See you guys.
Thank you so much for having us on the show.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.